This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
The biggest icon in podcasting.
Welcome in, everyone, to another episode of the DocNJock Wrestling Podcast. This is episode 162. I'm your host, Adam the Jock Strozinski. On today's episode, we'll be taking a look at the TLC pay-per-view that's coming up this Sunday, as well as why were a bunch of big-name wrestlers like Keith Lee sent back down to NXT. Of course, we're going to take a look at the biggest topics and trends in wrestling, and doing it with me, as always, he's the one, he's the only, he is the Doc. John Macaroon. What's up, cuz?
It's all good, brother. A great week of professional wrestling. I do want to talk about Raw a little bit when we get to it. It wasn't good. I sat through it. I was like, okay, the fans are not going to like this show. It's pointless. This is the go-home show for TLC. And then I saw the ratings, a 200,000 viewership dip from hour 1 to hour 3. That's unbelievable. And I think it was well-deserved because of the fact the show was garbage. And I know we start with SmackDown, but wow, you can't do that. You just can't on a primetime night when your advertisers are looking at what you're doing and you have 200,000 people. They basically said, we don't like this, click. And of course, part of the reason was everybody was going, dude, it's Cleveland and the Ravens, dude. And you didn't do nothing to even try to remotely counter-program that. And I think maybe that's part of it, but man, that was bad.
Yeah, I mean, we can stay with Raw if you want. It was an absolutely horrible show. There's really nothing. This is a go-home show for a pay-per-view, and you would expect it to be much better, at least help get you invested in what's going to take place this Sunday. And I think and this is bad because I don't even think it was all that good. The most entertaining segment that ran throughout the entire night was the whole Randy Orton, Bray Wyatt hide-and-seek segment. And I don't even think it was all that great. I mean, in the end, you end up dumping Bray Wyatt, who is sitting on a rocking chair. You end up dumping him into a gigantic wooden box and set it on fire. He comes out the Fiend, and he ends up choking Randy Orton out. This whole show was pretty pointless. It was not a solid build to one of your bigger and better pay-per-views, and I don't think it did anything to keep the fans' interest, especially like you said, on a Monday night, when you've got a Baltimore and you've got a Cleveland game, which it sounds weird to say. As sports fans and as sports guys, we know the Cleveland Browns for forever and a day, much like our Lions, have been absolute garbage. But this Cleveland team's really, really good. And this Baltimore team has one of the most exciting players on the field almost at all times with Lamar Jackson. You have this game going on. The counter-programming wasn't there. The forethought wasn't there. The foresight wasn't there. And I think a lot of this falls at the feet of, one, Bruce Pritchard, and two, Vince McMahon, because this is a lot of stuff that he wants. Something else that seems to kind of have taken a back seat is Keith Lee's push. At this point, I kind of feel like he's been derailed. This is a guy who came in and he basically went toe-to-toe with Brock Lesnar at the Royal Rumble. This is a guy who stood strong against Goldberg. This is a guy who stood strong against Braun Strowman. And yet he gets beat again. Keith Lee, I'm not really sure where he's going. He feels almost like he's kind of a spinning top waiting to fall over. I'm just not sure what the direction for Keith Lee is. And I've got a bunch of news on him during the news and notes segment.
Yeah, it's unbelievable because it's like it kind of, when you reflect on it, it kind of goes against what WWE and the developmental system is supposed to accomplish, right? With Keith Lee, you have him in NXT, you train him, he gets to wrestle big matches, you then expose him to the entire world in the ring with Brock Lesnar, and now you're saying he can't cut it? That's not really a good sign of what you're trying to accomplish in NXT. You have to say, okay, when you get promoted, there is no chance, zero chance that you get sent back, because otherwise you're reflecting on the fact that your training was bad. That's why you spend a year and a half in NXT. That's why you get trained. Look at the camera this way. Look at the hard mic this way. Move this way. To then go on the main roster, it kind of indicates then who's training them there or what's going on. There's never supposed to be a situation where I get it, and some people have made the argument that, because of the fact that these guys are not on the road anymore, with the house shows where they can work through some kinks and try some things out and do some things where not so many people see it in these house shows. I get that, but this is WWE. This is the big time. You got to train your guys well, and I don't think Keith Lee really needs it. I do think that the real issue is the producers that have been let go, the cutbacks. They take a toll, and now you're seeing why.
Yep, I agree with you 100%. Keith Lee is a guy who I feel like even when he went to NXT, he was pretty polished. There might have been a couple of things that you maybe had to work on him with, but I think overall this was a guy who was basically out the oven, ready to go. And I think WWE always wants to kind of put their own spin on it. They always want to take credit for making a guy. And that's why a lot of times they'll send these guys back to NXT or send them to NXT. And I don't think he necessarily needed it. I think you're right. It's a lot of the booking. It's a lot of the producers in the back that have either been furloughed, let go, or have left. And I think it's left a monster hole. And I think you see some of that with the struggles with the women. And this is kind of crossing over to what I witnessed on SmackDown. I think WWE with the women's division is kind of a mess right now. I think what you have on Monday Night Raw is absolutely brutal. And this was something that I took out of watching Monday Night Raw as well as watching SmackDown, because it seems like SmackDown has a pretty good handle on what they're doing with their women's division. I'm very intrigued by this Carmella Sasha Banks feud that we've got building. I think this is fantastic. I love the reinvigoration of Carmella. I think it's great. I think she's fun to watch on TV, and I think her going up against Sasha is awesome. I think NXT probably does their women's division the best. And there was a comment that was made on NXT on Wednesday night where they even admitted that they have the best women's division in wrestling. And I think that's accurate. I don't think AEW does a great job with their women. I don't think I think SmackDown does a pretty good job. I think Raw does an absolutely horrible job. Right now, you've got Asuka running around with the women's championship, but she has no direction. She has really nothing going on. You've been building towards this thing with Lana and Shayna Baszler and Nia Jax for months now. She just constantly gets thrown through tables, and she ends up leaving this week's Raw with an injury. So it leaves her kind of up in the air for TLC. Not really sure what's going on with that. It doesn't draw you in. It doesn't make you have any stake in any of this. It doesn't make you want to watch any of this. And I think WWE has one brand that does it right, and that's NXT with the ladies. And then I think SmackDown does a really good job giving you women's content, while Raw completely struggles. And whether it's because it's 3 hours or whether it's just because the actual women's division isn't that deep, or maybe it's because you have the Raw women's tag teams on Raw every single week and you're trying to fill that time slot with them. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm not sure if you feel the same way, where it just kind of feels like Raw does a really subpar job giving us women's wrestling, where NXT and SmackDown do a much, much better job in retrospect to what Raw provides.
Absolutely. I think you're spot on. The women in WWE do such a phenomenal job. The stories are interesting, and there's been an investment, a long-term investment. I think that's the key, is that a lot of the women in AEW are still new and fresh. People are still trying to figure out what they're about and the angles. And whereas WWE, they're kind of rolling along, and you have veterans that have just been there for so long teaching these women that it makes for great, compelling stories. And it's interesting. And just like with a lot of other companies, women just need a little bit more time, a little bit better exposure. You've lost a couple of big names, but when your top of the roster is Sasha Banks and Bayley and Asuka, you have stuff to work with. You just got to do a better job with creative to get them over at this point in time.
I mean, really and truly, and I'm not sure if this is a thing that's going to end up happening, but Charlotte Flair is due to come back at some point. I mean, I could see Raw just kind of dragging their feet until Charlotte comes back. She quickly beats Asuka. She now has a championship, and she's running around with the women's championship. All that being said, Asuka's a fantastic wrestler. I'm not sure why you can't book her in different programs and give her more to work with. She's incredible. One of the best gimmicks in all of wrestling at the time was her undefeated streak when she was in NXT. And then you bring her up to the main roster and you basically force feed her to Charlotte Flair to beat her for no good reason. It's really kind of sad what happens with the women on the Red brand. Thank goodness SmackDown can kind of pick up some of that slack, and NXT is just so damn good with the ladies. I'm really intrigued with what they're doing with Rhea Ripley and her character and the development that she's got going on right now. Sticking with NXT, I want to know if you're cool because it looks like this is what we're going to get. On this week's NXT, you had Kyle O'Reilly taking on Pete Dunne, ends up beating Pete Dunne in a fantastic match. So now we're going to have Finn Balor versus Kyle O'Reilly, while Killian Cross is going to put his title match, his title chase, back on hold to take out Damian Priest. So I want to know if you're cool with Finn Balor versus Kyle O'Reilly 2. Remember, last time they fought, Kyle O'Reilly lost a couple teeth, and Finn Balor had his jaw broken 3 places. And Killian Cross taking on Damian Priest.
Absolutely. I think it's going to be great. I think there's going to be a strong opportunity for a match of the year candidate. I think they had good chemistry. I like their matchup from before. I think that Finn Balor, even though I'm not a big, huge fan of him being on NXT, I think he's just such a bigger star. His role there, he's done well. So why not have him go at it? And I think it produces. Do you see any scenario, though, in which Finn Balor does not go over?
No, I think what this builds to is it builds to Killian Cross versus Finn Balor.
Yep.
Whether it's at the very next NXT pay-per-view or whether this is more along the lines of WrestleMania. I think that's where the money's made. I think Finn Balor, Killian Cross coming back for his title against the guy who ended up capturing it when he vacated it, a guy that he never lost to, a guy that ended up picking it up when he had to lay it down because he was hurt. I think that's where the money's made. I think that's where the story's at.
Nice, yeah. I think NXT's done a great job. Like you said, Killian Cross, his entrance, and Scarlett. What a great asset to have because their social media profile is really hot too. So it's really fun.
Yeah, I think that's a great gimmick. It's a great character. It's really fantastic. It's weird watching his progression, going from where he was at when he was with Impact to where he's at in NXT now. He was really good in Impact, but he is so much better in NXT. It's really unbelievable. And speaking of Impact, I want to get your review on this week's Impact.
Because I hope you got a chance. I know you've shared in the past that you've had to finagle a way to watch it, and I know from last week you did watch it. This week, it was one of those situations where you're like, C match, C gimmick. You're like, okay, you're seeing Brian Myers, you're seeing, the evolution of Moose, you're seeing, Tennille Dashwood, and you're like, okay, I could have some popcorn, but I could look away. And then it built to a crescendo where I marked out. It was great. And so Impact was good, and overall it was a B+, just based on the fact of what happened at the end. But the first hour, just skip it. It was just, you had Tennille Dashwood taking on Alicia Edwards. Alicia's good. It still needs a little bit of work to tighten up her ring work. Dashwood defeats Alicia to start it off. Moose addressed Rich Swann, and Willie Mack got in the fray there. It was good to kind of see now where the evolution of where Rich Swann and Moose are going to take things. You had Chris Bay defeating Manic in a good match, but like I said, nothing too great there. The women's match was okay. You had Steels and Hogan defeating Valkyrie and Rosemary. It's the evolution, and you're starting to see some more interest and push there from the mid-card of the women. But like you said, it's not, super intriguing where if you miss that, you're going to be like, oh my gosh. But it was interesting. It was good. Brian Myers did a good job. His spot in the mid-card is firmly planted at Impact. I really respect what he's doing. He gets the win over Alexander, and then it was awesome because, last week, you had Gallows and Anderson winning the tag team title, and then, of course, Chris Sabin is going to want a little bit of a get a little chance to get a little rub off of Carl Anderson. The Motor City Machine Guns reminded the world that the Impact Tag Champs get a chance to, to kind of, they want to catch the attention of the new champs. They want their rematch, but it was a great fight. I thought it was great. I thought that Chris Sabin held his own. It was great, and then all hell broke loose. And then all of a sudden, you see Kenny Omega, who was advertised to show up, and you're like, oh, wait a minute, there's a relationship from Japan with Gallows and Anderson. He's helping out. And they go after Swan, they go after Sabin, and you're like, yes, you got Gallows and Anderson with Kenny Omega. You have the potential now for the first official Impact versus AEW match, and it's gonna be awesome. And you're gonna see potentially the old Bullet Club taking on Swan, Sabin, and Alex Shelley to kick off 2021. Get out, bro! It was awesome. I was like, yes, this is perfect. This is how you get people over. This is how you reunite things and you bring that kind of nostalgia. The old Bullet Club came back, baby, and it was awesome to end Impact. A+. Now, the rest of the show, I mean, I get the vibe. Keep, slow build, paced perfectly. It's just not as interesting. The main event stuff at Impact is hot. It's good now. Early stuff, like I said, if you stick with watching the second hour, you're good, but they put it out there, man. It's the old Bullet Club wreaking havoc, and it was great to see. Perfectly timed. It was well done. Can't complain anything about it from my end. A+ main event situation. Good to see. Obviously, Gallows and Anderson getting the love over at Impact. And then you bring in Kenny Omega in the mix. Woo-hoo, it was good. Can you hear my excitement? It was good.
I think the one thing that Impact needs to do is this is going back to what you've been saying for months now, is try to find a way to make that first hour a little bit more interesting.
Yeah.
Because they've got their second hour nailed.
Yeah.
It's fantastic, especially come main event time. It's always a really good show. They've got to find a way to make it a little bit more interesting for that first 60 minutes. Now, the thing that is interesting, you mentioned Kenny Omega being an Impact. Kenny Omega is going to go with this whole belt collector thing.
Yeah,
this is his new gimmick. I'm okay with it. We've seen it done before. We've seen it done with the Hardys when they were bouncing around between ROH and Impact, and the AEW wasn't a thing at that time. But they were bouncing around between AAA. Kenny Omega just competed in AAA and defended his championship. So you've got Kenny Omega going on his belt collector saga here. It's going to be interesting. He's going to take on Rich Swann at the next upcoming pay-per-view. We'll have a little bit more on that, I believe, later on in news and notes. I want to know, so on Impact or on AEW, I want to save our reactions of the AEW show for later, because I don't know if we're going to differ. We haven't talked about this. I might come across really strong with my take on AEW. I might not. I'm not sure yet. We'll kind of see where that conversation goes. But I want to know what you thought of the Joey Janela versus Kenny Omega match. This was the main event of the night. Joey Janela, if you remember, did not get a chance to compete against Kenny Omega when he was in the tournament for his number one contendership to get the belt to take on Jon Moxley. So this was kind of a redux for Joey Janela. If you remember, Sonny Kiss took on Kenny Omega because Joey Janela had COVID at the time. So what you got was you had basically a 10-minute match between these two. It was a no-holds-bar, anything-goes match. So tables were brought in, cooking sheets were brought in, trash cans were brought in, and Don Callis starts this fight with Tony Schiavone on commentary. Don Callis tells Tony to get up, and Tony says, "I'm not getting up. I'm not leaving my spot." So Don Callis is basically doing commentary with the microphone that the entire crowd can hear, not the microphone that the audience on the television audience hears. And he's basically doing play-by-play. Kenny grabs a mic and starts doing color of his own match, which I thought was really interesting. I thought that was really funny. That was a really nice twist to it. Overall, I didn't think the match was anything special. They kind of went all out against each other, which was cool. In the end, you knew Joey Janela didn't stand a chance, so he ends up losing. Kenny Omega ends up winning. What you're going to have next week, and what I thought was really fantastic, was at the very end, you had Pac come out with the Lucha Brothers, and this sets up for Rey Fenix to take on Kenny Omega. And Pac is such an intense character. Like, everything he does, there's a scale of 1 to 10. Pac is always on like a 14, and it's like his arm veins and his head veins are ready just to explode because he's just jacked up all the time. So Pac ends up setting this match up with Tony Khan, and Kenny Omega is pissed off. And I think it sets up really nicely for next week. Overall, I thought the main event, I thought the best part of it was what Don Callis and what Kenny Omega brought to it when they were on the microphones.
Absolutely. It was great. I thought, okay, they stepped up a little bit. They're kind of now getting more comfortable in their roles, and it made for a great AEW program. It's always good to see Sting. Always good to kind of see a potential new feud emerging with Sting. I thought Joey Janela and Kenny Omega really put on a great show, and what a great... I think that's where I think you and I may be interested, is that you're seeing Kenny Omega and Joey Janela. You wouldn't think that. We would think that, okay, Kenny Omega is going to get a big-time wrestler. No, what AEW is doing is, and they've done consistently, is the champion fights, but they're not always fighting top guys. They're fighting mid-card guys, and the mid-card guys are getting over because of their experience with main event wrestlers, and this has been perfect. I think Joey Janela is a right candidate for it, right?
Yeah, I think in this match, Joey Janela comes out looking even more deadly than what he looked like before. You know, there was a part there where Kenny Omega's just taking it to him, and all of a sudden, Joey Janela wiggles his way out of a out of a one-wing angel and does a reverse hurricanrana, and next thing you know, he gets a little bit of offense in. His offense is cut short because he ends up missing a spot, but in the end, I think Joey Janela gets a good little rub from this. So no, absolutely. I think what you're saying is right. I think what you have here is you have really smart, intelligent booking by a guy like Tony Khan, who says, hey, you're the champion. Just because you're the champion doesn't mean you have to fight the same 5 guys every single week. We've got guys, we have a really deep roster. We've got to utilize everybody. And this is a good way to help get other people over and spotlight other people. Joey Janela can now take this. If he's smart and if they're going to give him more TV time, he can now take this and he can use this loss as some type of motivation, whether it drives him a little bit crazy, makes him a little bit more heel, whether it makes him a little bit more edgy. I don't know. There's something you can do here. They've got to figure it out. They've got to be smart enough in the room to kind of find it and give Joey Janela a few more minutes of television time every single week and let him kind of build on what just took place. And that's smart booking. That's good booking. And that's good wrestling business right there. So we'll see what happens. I'm not sure. Now, I do want to talk about the overall tenor of Dynamite. I think the best part of Dynamite this week was probably the interactions with Pac, followed closely by what we just talked about with Kenny Omega and Don Callis commentating on their own match. I thought Pac was absolutely great this week. There was a point where Lance Archer is beating up Eddie Kingston, Blade and Butcher come out. Next thing you know, you've got the Lucha Brothers and Pac come out. This leads to a weird little standoff between Lance Archer and Pac, and just the sheer size of Lance Archer compared to Pac is just unreal. But Pac is just so cut and so chiseled, and like I said, he's always at an intensity of like 1,000. But overall, I thought Dynamite was incredibly boring. I thought Dynamite lacked this week. I thought what you had in the very beginning with Cody Rhodes and Brandi Rhodes announcing that they're going to have a child, I thought that was really cool. I thought the Blade and the Butcher with Pac and Eddie Kingston and Lance Archer and the Lucha Brothers, I thought that was cool. And I thought Kenny Omega's match against Joey Janela was pretty good too. But otherwise, I thought this was a really lame show. And I don't know what I was expecting. I go into these not really expecting much. I just expect to be entertained. And I found myself playing around on my phone for most of this show. And that's generally how I can tell if a show has me captured or not. I feel like this wasn't a Vince McMahon, we tore it up 20 minutes before we went on air. But I really felt like this was one of those things where it was like, I'm not 100% sure how we're going to get from point A to point C. And we really got to do something with point B. So let's just kind of put some stuff here. And that's kind of how I felt like this show was. It just kind of bored me this week. I'm not sure if you're in the same boat as me or not.
Yeah, it wasn't boring. It just wasn't as... see, what AEW has started to do is... they've started to put out massive shows like that are pay-per-view quality. So coming off of it, it's kind of like what we'd call a transitional show. And kind of similar to Impact, it kind of peaked into what the main event was. And that's fine. Look, we're consuming a lot of wrestling. Not every angle is going to hit. And unfortunately, the early stuff just wasn't exactly as hot as what we would expect, with the talent that you have. But what we're seeing is AEW is giving other people opportunities. And
does AEW run the risk of burning its audience out by doing awesome shows like they did a couple weeks ago, where you had the introduction of Sting, you had the title change, and now you follow it up. You have the post show, and then you follow it up the following week, which would be this week, where it's just kind of, again, like you said, it's a transitional show. It wasn't horrible, it wasn't great, but there just wasn't that sizzle to it. Are they running the risk of burning the audience out with awesome shows like what we had with Winter is Coming?
No, I think that's where you build that crescendo, and I think that's what they try to do. Is you can start to see kind of the flow of things, is that you go build up the mid-card, build up storylines, have like B-plus shows, and then you have A-plus shows that sticks out, because you just can't have every single segment be A-plus. It's just not possible. You just have to have some matches that, you cut commercials through and you build up, and you have some women's matches, and you have some things that are just not as interesting, and then you have the build up to the main event. I think similarly to what Impact did is what AEW did. And I think that's why you're getting that vibe, is you just weren't really, the first hour didn't bump you, and it wasn't an A-plus show all the way through. But, you just can't have an A-plus show all the time, because then you diminish when you do have these quality shows out there. So it did kind of have a feel of a transitional type show, but that's what it is.
All right, so let's transition into our predictions for tables, ladders, and chairs. And this just came across as we're recording this. There will be a Firefly Inferno match at TLC. So Randy Orton and The Fiend will compete in the first ever Firefly Inferno match. I want to know real quick before we start doing our predictions, do you think that's going to be one of those cinematography type matches, or do you think this is going to kind of be one of those matches where it kind of sprawls across different sets and they end up in the back and then they end up in the ring at the very, very end? How do you think this match is going to play out?
I kind of had the feel of a cinematic match, but I have no clue. My interest for TLC is not the best. The way they built it up across WWE, I'm intrigued to see how they do it. Kind of burnt out a little bit on the cinematic matches because I kind of want to see them once or twice a year. But if these combatants are in it, I'd be okay.
So let's just kind of start right there. So we've got The Fiend Bray Wyatt taking on Randy Orton in a Firefly Inferno match. Nobody's really sure what this means and how it's going to be produced and how we're going to get it. I'm assuming it's going to be another cinematography type match, another cinematic match, almost like a movie, kind of like what they did with The Undertaker, AJ Styles. I've got Bray Wyatt winning this. This is going to take place on his home court. Why the hell wouldn't he win on his own home court? Who do you have winning this?
Yeah, absolutely. It's The Fiend. I see no chance for Randy Orton. It's going to be a fun match to see how it plays out. In any scenario, you have to have The Fiend going to 2021 as a big-time player. If he loses, the gimmick's dead. It's worthless.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Now, just a reminder, the match card can change at any time. We are doing this before SmackDown airs, so things can get added in, things can get taken out, things can get adjusted. This is what the card looks like at this time while we're recording. Universal Championship match, Roman Reigns defending against Kevin Owens in a TLC match. I've got Roman Reigns winning. Who do you have?
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be great, though. TLC, I think Kevin Owens is going to need to he's going to want to aim to have people put respect on his name. It's going to be good. But yeah, Roman Reigns is the guy. He can't lose this.
Then we've got the WWE Championship, Drew McIntyre defending against AJ Styles in a TLC match. I wouldn't be surprised if Miz and Morrison got involved in this match at some point. Miz has been threatening to cash in his Money in the Bank briefcase for a while now. Who do you have winning this match?
Ooh, interesting. I really like, how Miz and Morrison have come back and have done their thing. I like, it's kind of that nostalgic feel. I would like them to do more, to have more of an opportunity to do stuff. So this one's tough. Oh, man. I'll let you go first because I want to see, because I'm going back and forth at the same time. I can't even lock it down yet.
Yeah, I think it's really, really tough. I think what's a little bit telling is AJ Styles beat the living hell out of Drew McIntyre on the Go Home show on Monday Night Raw when it all finished. He climbed up, grabbed the belt. I'm going to go with Drew McIntyre because of that. WWE has a bit of a formula with the way they book.
Yeah, see, I'm such a fan of AJ Styles and the fact that he could have a faction with anybody. I kind of was, as I was talking, was picturing a faction with him and Miz and Morrison, just picturing how they could be used in the future. AJ is so good, and I want him to win. I just want him to, but I don't see it. I never like to pick against it, but it doesn't make any sense in either way. I'm trying to think of any way, what story could you tell with AJ Styles starting the year off with a belt, but I don't see it. It's Drew McIntyre. He's just a man. I love his entrance now with the sword. It's going to be fun. I think that it's a scenario in which AJ Styles will, I think, be used to aid Drew McIntyre by having a world-class 5-star match.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a fantastic match. And again, I'm in the same boat as you. I don't want to pick against AJ Styles because somebody who is very, very intelligent and watches just as much wrestling as me once told me you never pick against AJ Styles.
Unless it's against Drew and it's the end of the year and AJ hasn't done, when his stock is at the lowest, you have to.
Right. So it feels really weird picking Drew McIntyre in this match. We've got the SmackDown Women's Championship. We've got Sasha Banks taking on Carmella. Now, I love the reinvigoration of Carmella. I think she has been absolutely fantastic. I love what she's doing. I want to know where you're going with this match.
No doubt. Sasha Banks, she's the champ. Carmella's great contender. Perfect spot for her, but she's not winning.
Yeah, see, I'm going to go, I lean towards Sasha Banks. Like, if I had to split it from 100%, I'm going to say 57% Sasha Banks. And the reason for that is Sasha Banks usually doesn't hold on to a title very long. She's usually that transitional champion, or she'll get a belt, then she'll drop a belt immediately. Carmella has come out extremely hot and looks very, very good. And I'm very surprised that they've already got her in a match of this caliber this quickly. This seems like it would be one of those things where you would do a little bit of a slower build, really let her character take a foothold, and then you go into one of these types of matches. Instead, it's been like 2 weeks and like, hey, we've got a pay-per-view. Here you go. So I'm going to go Sasha Banks. It feels weird. I wouldn't be surprised if Carmella won this thing, though. But, man, it's tough. Again, by 57% says Sasha Banks. We've got the Women's Tag Team Championship. We've got Nia Jax and Shayna Baszler taking on Asuka. And I'm going to assume it's going to be Lana, but we have no confirmation who her tag partner could be. It could be Mandy Rose. This past week, Mandy Rose came out and did some regulating with a chair. It could be anybody as Asuka's partner. I'm not sure who they're going to pair her with. Does Nia Jax and does Shayna Baszler drop their women's tag team championship belts this pay-per-view?
Gosh.
It's really hard because they did such a bad job building this.
Yeah, no, I don't see it. I think that you just got to keep Nia Jax, keep him with the title. Because how do you sell that Asuka with a new partner off the rip gets a title? I don't see it. I don't see it.
I mean, I think Asuka's arguably the best performer of the group, but I don't know who the hell her tag partner is, so it makes it really, really difficult to kind of pick. Oh, man, this is such a difficult one. I kind of want to lean towards Asuka just because I'm really tired of this whole Nia Jax thing. I could see Asuka and I could see Lana. I'm going to go Asuka. I'm going to go Asuka. I'm over here talking myself into it here. I'm going to go Asuka and whoever her partner is. I'm assuming it's going to be Lana. And I think they'll end up just getting a weird victory here. So you've got the Raw Tag Team Champions taking on the Hurt Business. So the New Day versus the Hurt Business. Who do you think wins this one? Wouldn't it be interesting if at some point you had the Hurt Business have all the belts, like all the belts on Raw?
That'd be awesome, wouldn't it?
That'd be great.
That'd be great for a faction, but WWE never seems to know how to handle themselves with a faction of that quality. I mean, you kind of they feel like they want to keep them at a B+, but they won't let them step into that A+ realm. But in this scenario, you got such a I don't see a scenario in which you don't let the New Day get over here on this one.
Yeah, I'm gonna go the New Day as well. It's weird. I think they've been doing some decent storytelling with the New Day. If you go back to that match against the Street Profits, they were hitting their moves on the Street Profits, and the Street Profits kept kicking out of moves that would normally finish everybody. So there a couple of the moves that they would use Big E for, they don't have Big E anymore. But a couple of the moves that they would normally use Big E with that would finish people aren't finishing people. So you're going to have to see the New Day undergo a little bit of an evolution. And I think that's what we might get here. We might get another block of that building laid here when they take on the Hurt Business. Now we've got the SmackDown Tag Team Championship. We've got the Street Profits taking on Dolph Ziggler and Robert Roode. I'm going to go with the Street Profits.
Yeah, man. Again, another wrestler like Robert Roode. You think at some point, put him with AJ Styles, put him in a faction, put him with something sweet. Yeah, again, with Robert Roode, I just think why not put him in a faction, a guy that's been so underutilized, a guy that probably, when you think about it, is regretting signing the contract. Street Profits are awesome, man. Great on the mic. They're about to have a big year. Maybe on the next podcast, we'll do a stock watch on certain individuals heading into 2021. They're on the rise, so give me Street Profits.
Sounds good. Just to quickly touch on it, you have a 5-point lead, 11.5 to 6.5. I'm assuming the next couple of shows are going to be a little bit different, just because we have the holidays, so we'll be operating on a shortened week from when we normally record. So if you guys are listening, just be aware that our programming is going to change a little bit. Then after the holidays, we'll flip right back. We don't ever miss an episode, so we've always got to put some content out there for you. It'll be interesting. It'll be fun. We'll put our own little Doc and Jock twist on it. It'll be great. I do have some news and notes if you're ready for that.
Hit me with this week's professional wrestling news and notes. What made your list this week, sir?
So WWE Chairman Vince McMahon sent Keith Lee and a couple of other big men to the WWE Performance Center for additional seasoning. According to Dave Meltzer of Wrestling Observer Radio, this move is not viewed internally as a demotion. Rather, McMahon considered it a case of further polishing for Lee and the guys that went down there, so they are ready for major opportunities in the future. Along with Lee, McMahon reportedly set up classes for Otis, Omos, Dabba-Kato, Mace of Retribution, all at the WWE Performance Center in Orlando, Florida. Per PW Insider, the performance classes will occur on Tuesday and Thursday, so they've already taken place and were taught by WWE producer Adam Pearce and superstar Drew Gulak. Former WWE ref Mike Chioda recently appeared on the Wrestling Inc. Daily podcast to discuss how things work for refs in WWE and the difference with AEW. He said, this is his quote, "They're not employees. They're independent subcontractors. They'll get their stuff, their ring crew ref, the ring crew refs, like I was for 20 years plus. I was a ring crew and ref. I got everything paid for, whether it was per diem, hotels, transportation, gas, and everything. There are a lot of refs still with WWE that have to pay for their own hotels, cars, food, expenses on the road, health insurance, and everything. AEW takes care of health insurance as well, too. They take care of a lot." So what it sounds like is in WWE, you've got basically two classes of referees. If you're a part of the ring crew and a referee, basically everything is paid for. If you're just a referee, it sounds like you are basically treated like a wrestler, where you've got to pay for your own hotels, your own cars, your own food, your own expenses, your own travel, and your own health insurance. Whereas AEW takes care of your health insurance, and they usually help feed you at all the shows. According to Dave Meltzer, Wrestling Observer Radio, Impact and Kenny Omega will have an interesting arrangement. We talked about this a little bit earlier. Kenny Omega did appear on the Final Resolution pay-per-view the other night, and he reunited with former Bullet Club teammate Carl Anderson and gave him a bit of a pep talk ahead of Anderson's match with Ethan Page. Meltzer also reported that in the most recent edition of Wrestling Observer newsletter that Omega will be headlining at least some of Impact's pay-per-views. The next one is Hard to Kill on January 16th. The most highly rumored opponent seems to be Impact World Champ Rich Swann, which would play into a potential belt collector run for Kenny Omega. So I think what we got this week kind of plays into that and lays a little bit of the groundwork for that to kind of lay out with that January 16th pay-per-view. And that's it for this week's wrestling news and notes.
Make sure you follow Adam on Twitter at AdamRSTROZ. Follow the network at Detroit Sports Podcast. Follow the network on Twitter at Detroit Podcast. When you're online and you go to your favorite place that you listen to podcasts, all you got to type in is Detroit Sports Podcast. And when you subscribe, our daily content finds you. And we appreciate all the support over the years. A great podcast. I enjoy talking wrestling, DocNJock on Thursdays, Practice Squad on Fridays. We have a great lineup of daily content, the Michigan podcast, Open Mic Night, the Fantasy Football Show, the Fantasy Fanalist, the Fan Report. Great content each and every day. And I appreciate everybody that's broadcast with us and everybody that's hitting that subscribe button, interacting, letting us know what you think. And for Putty, yes, I understood that the commercial was a reference to the past. I just didn't like it because why would you put indie carny stuff on the present? I understand what they were doing. The low budget feel was the idea was that you have Tony Khan, who's a billionaire, and you got Tony Schiavone, and they're hamming it up, and it's fine. But I'm thinking that it would have been much better had they worn suits or had they been styling and profiling Ric Flair style in a created, produced, cinematic commercial. That's what you need. You're Tony Khan, but it's great. You want to reference the past, that's fine. But you don't want, you don't want your company known as like the House of Indies. You don't want it to be that. You don't want it to be the carny feel. I get it. It's nostalgia. Heck, you got half of the old, AEW is going to be the retirement home for all these wrestlers. I'm pretty sure. I was shocked. It's been 2 years? We haven't seen the Bushwhackers yet. What's going on? Who's the next former WWE really old wrestler show up? I don't know. Is Hacksaw still alive? What's going on? But hey, if they all can be, if all the old wrestlers can retire at AEW, get some money and be managers, hey, why not, man? It's all good. But at the same time, I just don't like the indie feel. You got to have a modern look. It's 2021, baby. That's what you got to do.
Yeah, I don't know if they're going to end up bringing in all the old retreads, but I think some of the people that you'll see who were really important to WCW and were really important at that time when WCW was on TNT, like Sting, I think you'll see some of those guys brought back. I don't think it's going to become a retirement home. God, I hope it doesn't become a retirement home.
Oh, my God, look at that.
Could you imagine if AEW went back to kind of what WCW was, where they brought in all the WWF retreads?
Who's that coming from the crowd? It's Lex Luger. Oh, it's the
He's back from the dead.
It's the Great Muta, his 15th retirement tour. Great stuff, sir. I can't wait to talk to you next week.
Yeah, it should be a good one next week, man. It'll be interesting. Like I said, the content's going to change a little bit because we've got the holidays, but there'll be some good shows. We always do good work, I think.